It's 6 a.m. and I lie awake wondering if I can make the trek from Hopkinton to Boston today. I've been training since Labor Day in the dark, the rain, the snow, the fog, and the sub-zero weather. But I'm not certain it's enough. Imagine that, 70 to 100 miles a week. Yet I'm frightened that I won't make it. I fear that I might crash and burn out there on the course. But I'm committed. I've told the world, including my law students, I'm running today, and more importantly, I've told myself. Well, it's high noon and we're off, running the road to Boston. The first mile's pace is slow and downhill, and I think maybe this run is not going to be so bad after all. The crowd is great. I can't determine if they've come to see the winner, Johnny Kelly, or maybe even me, because they haven't stopped cheering since the first runner went by. The young and the old extend their hands, wanting just to touch us, to wish us luck. Somehow I know I will need a lot of luck today and a lot of support from this crowd. And for the first 10 miles, they don't disappoint me. They clap, they cheer, they line the streets with water and oranges and all the encouragement that they can muster. They see my sweatshirt and they shout, "Go for it, Massachusetts School of Law, we're with you." Boy, teaching law is a lot easier than this, but then no one cheers for you. And so we run through Ashland, then Framingham, and into Wellesley. Just when I begin to think that I can do this, before sunset at least, it begins to rain. Now, if you're a top-seeded runner, the rain won't be much of a problem because you're entering Cleveland Circle now. But for me, I begin to wonder if I can run 13 miles in the pouring rain. The crowd begins to go home, and I think that maybe I should join them. By mile 14, I feel my form start to deteriorate. My right hip hurts, and I'm starting to freeze. Man, I'm simply a mess. But I keep on running, left, right, left. I keep going. I'm approaching Newton now, with the hills up ahead. My hands are numb from the cold, and my feet aren't far behind. As I run by the Red Cross station, a worker yells out, "Are you okay? Do you need anything out there?" Well, one hill down, 2 more to go. I'm hopeful now I will make it to Boston. It's been pouring for hours now. The crowd is gone. And at the water station, no one is working except the cleanup crew sweeping up the mess. The runners have come and gone. But hey, what about me? I need water too. And boy, would I kill for a slice of orange. Keep running, Diane. Left, right, left. Although I'm not overly religious, at mile 21 I begin to pray. And I make the promise of the hopeless. Dear God, I'm not certain I can make another mile. But if you help me out, you carry me into Boston. I promise I'll be good, for the rest of my life even. Keep running, Diane. Left, right, left. Then I pray the prayer of the truly desperate. Okay, God, if you do me this favor, I'll go to church every Sunday. I'll do anything you ask if you do me this one little favor. Left, right, left. Yahoo, there it is, the Sitco sign, only a mile or so to go. So as I shuffle up the overpass, I realize for the first time that I am going to make it. And finally, there it is, the beautiful Prudential Tower. I have made it. Through the hills, the rain, and the wall of pain. I have made it. I have made it. Welcome to the Massachusetts School of Law Educational Forum. Thank you for joining us. This program is brought to you by the Massachusetts School of Law and is shown nationwide. The topic for today's show is the Boston Marathon. And joining me first will be the legendary Bill Rogers, 4-time winner of the Boston Marathon. Bill, let's turn back time to the year 1975. You were a 27-year-old BC student when you won the 79th Boston Marathon. Tell us about this run.
I remember my brother giving me these gloves to keep my hands warm, and I remember wearing those gloves through the race, and they became sort of a symbol for me, because after I won the race, I realized I liked running in cool weather and the conditions, and it was the whole condition, you know. But it was a big surprise for me. I hadn't won a big marathon.
And you stopped a number of times to tie your shoe, to have a drink.
I had to tie my shoe, you know. It was my lace was undone. I had to tie it, but it happened fortunately late into the race, and I had gotten a lead, and it was just near the bottom of Heartbreak, so it was just like a little rest and everything, you know, give me a chance to get going and know I could go then to the finish, you know. But I just remember that my friends, Jason, I think I remember seeing Jason on the course, and my family. Actually, my mom and dad didn't know I won. They heard it on the radio or something.
What did winning the Boston Marathon mean to you?
It was just a thrill in the sense that I loved going out there. I loved running. You know, I was a person who I think running has always been a big plus in my life, you know, ever since I was a high school kid and everything. It was something I did pretty well, and I wasn't the best in the country or something like that, but you know, as a high schooler or a collegian. But then when I found the marathon, I found a chance to explore where maybe I could be at a higher level, and I could really explore this event. And I like that. I mean, I like the work ethic of the marathon. You can really dig into this thing, you know. And I didn't have the speed, though, as much work ethic as I had. I didn't have the speed, the natural ability to do well in a shorter distance race. My natural ability was for the marathon. And so it took me a while to find out. I took some meetings in the marathon. Most of us do. Very few people run their first marathon as a great success, you know. But Boston just was a race where I think my life changed a lot in Boston by moving to this city and by moving the marathon, very much so.
What goes through your mind when you're running up Heartbreak Hill? What do you think about?
It has always depended for me if I was running well. If I had hit the wall like I did 3 times in the Boston Marathon when I got really dehydrated, the times I dropped out in my life was always when it was real warm and I didn't take in enough water or sports drink. I went a little too fast. And but if I was feeling good, I liked it because I like training on hills. If you can train on hills, then you're going to do just fine at Boston. And if you run carefully for the first half, you know. But to me, it's a thrill because the crowds are huge. And you know when you crest Heartbreak Hill, 21.5 miles, you're getting close to home. You know, and you can see the Hancock building off in the distance, the finish line. And you know, you really got this drive that you're getting there. That's what I love about the Boston course.
How many times have you run Boston?
I believe I've run 16. My first one was 73, and I dropped out, you know, and I've had actually mixed success at Boston. I dropped out 3 times. So that's quite a few DNFs. You know, very disappointing, but it's a very bizarre course. And
It is that?
it's not like the modern era marathons that came after Boston, Boston being such an old race. It's not like New York. Well, New York's kind of a tough course, too. It's not like London or Berlin or Tokyo, Beijing. These marathons are all nice and flat. You know, in Boston, you have to rock and roll. You have to shift gears like you have a stick shift and maneuver and climb hills. And I think that's why I think Boston is one of the I think it's maybe the ultimate marathon to challenge yourself at because of the hills.
When did you see your first Boston Marathon? Were you a young tyke, or did you see it in your adult life for the first time?
I may have seen some footage, like when I was in college, when my roommate, Ambrose Burfoot, I was at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, Midtown, Connecticut, and we ran together, but he was the marathoner. He was aiming for it with a terrific vision, you know, and I didn't quite understand the marathon too much. I saw the Olympic marathon on TV and everything, but my first Boston was when I moved here in '71, and Jason and I, here at our store, we were roommates, and here near Symphony Hall, and we just came over to the finish and checked out the finish, and I was stunned. You know, the crowds of people, I'd never seen anything like it in my life.
Yeah.
What is this? You know, this is just so exciting, and I love the feeling and the atmosphere.
Did you think back then, gee, I got to do this?
It took me 2 years. It took me 2 years. I had quit running. You know, I think a lot of runners do quit running because it's hard. It's a hard sport, and sometimes you get disappointed, or you're no longer part of a team. And once I left college, I didn't feel part of a team, and I always needed that. I always needed that friend connection, and so until I sort of, I think, had a chance to redirect my life or something, I think they went hand in hand. That I got into running again, and I got into some other areas of my life. I got involved actually in special education for a while. You know, I became a teacher and everything. So I needed that focus, and for a while I didn't have any focus in my running. But the Boston Marathon provided that, you know. And then a lot of other folks in the Boston area, I hooked up with a lot of ex-collegiate track folks. Jack McDonald from Boston College, Bob Seveny, who's a coach in the area, a bunch of runners. We all wanted to keep going, but there was how can we do it? We had to get together on ourselves, and Coach Billy Squires from Boston State University became our coach, and developed a terrifically powerful marathon team.
Yes, you did. Actually, one of the kids that I went to high school with, Randy Thomas.
Randy Thomas, oh yes.
Yeah, ran with
Randy
your
was
gang.
a heck of a runner.
Yeah.
Whoa, he was good. And I think he was another of the guys that coached squires like me or Bobby Hodge or Dick Mahoney and even Alberto Salazar. He played a role in a lot of top American marathoners' lives, you know, and really helped them become the athletes they were. And Randy was one of the top guys in the country, you know, terrific competitor.
What distinguishes Boston? Is it the hills?
I think a lot of it is the hills, because the marathon is a challenge no matter what. If it's got hills, it adds to the challenge even more. I think it's the hills, it's the history probably of Boston, you know, the 105 or 6 years now, you know, of Clarence DeMar and Johnny Kelly running it till he was 86 years old, and no other race has history like that, you know, and so I think that it is run along this pretty much the same course, you know, and we can all go out there and you might beat, anyone could beat the best runners in the world, you know, you could beat them. We all have to sort of run smart. It's a test for each individual, sort of, or a challenge for each individual. And Boston is one of the peak ones, and when I go to races all over the country, I do about 20, 25 races a year, and runners always ask me about Boston. How can I get in? Can I qualify? How can I get my time down? I want to do Boston. I want to do Boston. They rarely say that about as much as I think runners love maybe New York or Baltimore or Philadelphia, whichever race it may be. There are some very popular races, but they're popular for different reasons, you know. And Boston, I think, is the city here is wonderful, but it's almost just the race, you know.
And the crowd, it's very hard to quit.
Yeah. Well, I consider them part of the race package.
Sure they are.
Know?
Sure they are.
And yeah, the crowd, the people here, watching the race so many years, you know, their family is out there, their friends are out there. They've made the race, really, you know.
Describe what it's like the last 6 miles.
I always call from around 20 to 24 in no man's land, because it's such a physical and mental struggle, and that's where I think the media should really focus, because that's where the story of the marathon is, you know.
Sure it
That's
is.
when people are really fighting.
That's where people hit the wall.
That's where we all hit the wall. We all struggled then.
The key is to hit it as late into the race, I guess, as you can.
And I think the interesting thing is that people who don't run or don't work out or something may not still understand, well, why would people want to put themselves through it? That's the way they perhaps view it. But it's more like finding something that's really good for you, but you have to find it. It's like the golden fleece. You know, Jason? Jason the organizer, finding that within yourself. And running the marathon is a way to find that or something. I know I'm getting philosophical here, but I think for people who don't run the marathon and don't understand it, it's not a painful thing, but it's something that is a challenge that we all can find and do, but and it's a step-by-step kind of a fun process going along the way, you know.
Describe what it was like to run in the 100th Boston Marathon.
The 100th marathon was a great, terrific time, because everyone in the whole, it seemed like running world was there, and it was Boston at its absolute zenith, you know, and you know, I had to run it. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, I always say, and you know, I had to run it, and you know, if I could be here for the 200th, I'd run that one too.
Oh, well, hopefully you will be. Will you run Boston again?
Oh yeah, I have to. I have to, because I dropped out, you know. I dropped out in my last one, but I don't have the drive to compete in the marathon like I used to. You know, I ran 50 marathons under 2:15, so that was in like 15 years or something, you know. And so it was a lot of really hard racing, and now I would like to run it. You know, I want to run it because I want to finish it, you know, and be part of the race.
Tell us about Jock Semple.
Oh, Jock Semple was a great guy, a great individual for the Boston Marathon. You know, one of the people, along with Will Cloney, who for like 40 years as one of the race organizers, race directors, kept the race strong, you know, when it was an amateur event, and
right.
He loved the event, and of course, in a sort of almost unfortunate way, he became known for the time that he challenged Catherine Switzer as she attempted to run the race though she broke the rules and women weren't supposed to run.
Because we were only fit to go a mile and a half. But anyway, notwithstanding that.
Yeah, and Jock as an athlete sort of should have known better. But I think he was from such a past era. I mean, by then he was probably in his 60s or 70 years old, and he was running in probably the 20s and 30s. And I think in those days, you know, it was like the Olympics. People from that era didn't really understand things, whereas the younger runners really had a different view about the women running. You know, and I remember Ambrose Burfoot giving his first prize award to a women's winner of a race back in like the 60s, early 70s, you know. And so Jock was kind of, Jock loved the race, but he didn't understand, unfortunately, that women could be great athletes, just as great as men, and he just didn't understand that. The good news is that he and Catherine became great friends, and out of that clash at Boston, Catherine Switzer played a role and helped elevate women's running. Out of that clash, you know, she started the Avon Women's Running Program and things like that. So Jock had an indirect, very bizarre role that way, but he was really he would always get very feisty race day, you know, because he thought it was his baby, the Boston Marathon. And
His race.
It was his race. It
Yeah.
was like his little race, even though it was really quite a big race, you know.
And didn't he tell you in the 75 marathon at some point, speed it up, because if you do, you'll set a record or something of the like?
Yeah, he was hanging out this Greyhound bus door or something, and he was saying in his Scottish brogue, and keep going, you've got the record, you've got the record.
Bill, how do you feel about the lack of competitive American runners today?
I think on the marathon side, we haven't had the focus as much. And we've recently, USA Track and Field, I should say, and the Roadrunners Club of America have instituted Team USA, which is a national program with several different training facilities. One is at our Olympic Training Center in Chula Vista, California, where many of our top athletes are now training. For the first time ever, we're actually paying some coaches and giving some stipends to our distance runners to help them compete against the Japanese, the Kenyans, you know, and runners from all over the world. Because our sport is one of the most international sports. I don't think most people realize this. It's not a domestic sport. It's international.
International.
And it's very competitive sport. So all over the world, you have young people growing up and going out running, and our athletes are very good. Dina Drawson, for example, took 6th at New York City, the fastest time ever by an American woman in her first marathon. Rod DeHaven took 6th at the Boston Marathon, beat a lot of top Kenyans and other athletes from around the world. And but I think a lot of our talent has been on the track, and they've stayed on the track as distance runners. But there's this new group of young 25-year-olds that are about to break through, and those are the runners. Sometimes we don't know who they are yet, but there's someone with a vision or a dream to do well, you know, someone like Adina Drawson, you know, who's now one of the best in the world, you know. And but I think we have untapped talent, you know. We need the financial support. And if our other sports are strong in America, it's partly because they have tremendous financial support. And running has never had financial support. It's mainly been events like the Boston Marathon or New York City Marathon, and people like Jacques Semple or Fred Lebow, and these people who are key supporters of individual athletes. They kind of got the athletes to victory.
Well, in 1975, you won the Boston Marathon with a time of 2:09:55. Just turn back to 1997, and that time still would have won today. Why haven't we seen times decrease?
They've gone down. They've gone down enough. You know, they have gone down quite a lot better, lower than my best time of 2:09. For example, the world record is 2:05:42 on the men's side, and the women's world record has come down too. These records have come down primarily by the altitude-born athletes, you know, and they've played a huge role in our sport. And they've kind of raised the bar for everybody in the sport. And but I think on an individual day, you know, the times vary so much. At the World Championships this past summer in Canada, the winning time was won in 2 hours and 12 minutes. It was a hot day. So the marathon is a race more where the challenge is competition, who you're duking it out with, you know, And are you good in the heat? Can you handle the heat? Do you believe you can be good in the heat? Things like that, you know. It's really a team sport in that you need your training partners to give you ability to train to a level that where you start gaining confidence in yourself, you know. And once you have that, then it's like you start challenging yourself and your competition, and then you can get stronger and stronger, you know.
Bill, my final comment. I'm going to go back in time nearly 30 years. And it was a race day that was a man's championship, but it was an open race, meaning anybody could run. And I don't imagine you'll remember this, but I approached the people to sign up for this 18-mile run, and the race director said, "Oh, no, you possibly can't run. This is intended only for men." And you were standing over in the corner, and I got into a to-do because I thought I could run and should be able to run because it was open. And you came over and intervened, and you said, "Let the lady run." And they gave in. So now, 30 years later, I get a chance to say thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, I think any runner's worth his salt, you know. These days, I think, absolutely. I'm glad you got out there and you've had a blast. You know, running is great, isn't it?
I'm here talking with Jason, who is the assistant manager at the Bill Rogers Running Center. What accounts for the lack of young American runners really striving to do well in the sport?
I think maybe priorities are a little different now. You know, there is less inclination to spend 5 years of your life seeing if you're going to be a world-class runner. People are a little more concerned with careers now, it seems. And, you know, in the old days, average people trained like world-class athletes just to see how good they could be. And I think that sort of attitude sort of was prevalent in general, you know. It's a little different now.
Jason, what role has running played in your life?
I was an enthusiastic high school runner. Billy was on the same track team I was at Newington High School, and it was a great start for us in terms of getting into running.
Morgan! Phone! Yeah, Morgan here. So, hi. Right now? Okay. The eensy-weensy spider climbed up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain. And the eensy-weensy spider climbed up the spout again.
I love you, Daddy.
I love you, sweetheart.
Family. Isn't it about time?
What can I say? It's my girl.
From the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
You know how inquisitive kids are. That's why you store sharp objects in a safe place. Keep medicines out of reach. And if you have a gun, you keep it unloaded and locked away. As concerned members of the television community, we urge you to be just as careful with television. Kids don't always know what they're watching. That's why you should.
Kids aren't afraid of other kids. Or people with different colored skin. That's because kids know there are other things. Worse things. Bigger things to be afraid of. Like monsters from outer space! Remember, friends come in all colors.
Joining me now is the legendary number 261, Kathrine Switzer, formerly known as Kay Switzer. Kathrine, let's go back in time to 1967. You were then a student at Syracuse with a dream, and that was to compete in the Boston Marathon. So you filled out an entry, Kay Switzer. Tell us the rest of the story.
Well, you know, the story begins a week before that happened, Diane, because I was training at Syracuse University with Arnie Briggs, who was sort of the unofficial track coach at Syracuse University. He was actually the campus mailman. And he had run the Boston Marathon 15 times, and he had regaled me all through training with these wonderful stories of Boston. He didn't believe a woman could do the Boston Marathon. And I said, don't be ridiculous. I said, Roberta Gibb ran in 1966. Well, Arnie wouldn't believe it. And he said, if you show me in practice, I would take you to run the Boston Marathon, but I don't believe a woman can do it. And I said, hot diggity, now I have an opportunity to show him that a woman can do it, and a coach and a goal. And we did this distance in practice, the 26 miles, 385 yards, and then I said, let's do another 5 miles to make sure we can finish the Boston Marathon. We ran 31 miles. Arnie passed out at the end of this workout, and he was overwhelmingly convinced then that women could do this, and became an evangelist for women's running. He insisted that I filled out the entry form. It was Arnie who said, listen, Boston's a serious race. You've proved yourself in practice. You must fill out the entry form. And I signed my name, K.V. Switzer, which is something I have done since I was 12 years old because I wanted to be a writer. And I thought that signing my name with my initials was kind of a neat thing to do. But we had, Diane, looked at the rule book to make sure there was no restrictions on women running in the Boston Marathon. And the rule books, the AAU rule books at the time, said nothing about gender in the marathon. So we felt we would be unusual, but we didn't feel we were ever doing anything illegal.
Did you know you were prohibited from running in the Boston Marathon?
No, we absolutely didn't think that we were prohibited from running. We knew it would be unusual because women hadn't run. And I was wondering why Roberta had run the year before without numbers, and she slipped out of the bushes right after the start and ran. But I had no idea that she was denied any kind of entry. And Arnie said, listen, you've got to do these things legally. You've got to sign up, you've got to get your travel permits, and you've got to get a physical, which I got at the school infirmary at Syracuse University. So we sent all of our paperwork in together. Arnie and me and John and Tom, we ran as a team. And the rest is history, as they say, because the morning of the race, it was snowing and sleeting, and Arnie, the coach, went in and picked up this envelope of our numbers as a team and came out to the car. We pinned them on and did our warm-up. This is kind of how we did it at all our track meets, so there was nothing unusual at that point.
What did Jock Semple say to you? What did he do to you, and how did you react?
Well, it was funny because, as I say, it was snowing and sleeting at the start of the race, so we all had on these gray warm-up suits, and you look at any of the archival footage of the race, and you'll see all the men were dressed alike, so from a distance, I probably looked like one of them. I was pushed into the starting pen area by Will Cloney, who was the race director, and he said, come on, runners, get in there, and he pushed me, and I looked at Arnie, and I said, well, obviously, he knows I'm a woman, there's no problem here. He was probably looking and checking off the numbers, see, in his defense.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got into the start, and all the men were so congratulatory and wishing me the best of luck. The gun went off. Down the street we went. And of course, it's like going to Mecca for a first-time marathon runner. I couldn't believe, after all the training and all the sleet and snow and ick of Syracuse, that I was finally now going to Boston. I was with people who were like-minded, who loved to run and loved distance, and here I was, and I was in heaven. But 4 miles into the race, the press truck crank came through, and in those years, the press truck started behind the runners, if you can imagine this, beeped its way through. We all had to move over, and the press truck came through, and it was a flatbed truck with risers on the back and photographers, and well, they went crazy seeing me, a woman in the race wearing numbers, and began, taking our pictures. Well, we were waving to them and that kind of business, and alongside of us came another bus, which was the scribes, the journalists, and they were apparently teasing Jock Semple, who was the co-race director on the bus, that there's a woman in your race, hey Jock, she's wearing 261, and he just lost his temper. He made the bus stop and jumped off the bus and went down the street and went after me, and I didn't hear him until just a split second before he grabbed me. I heard his feet, and I turned like this, and you can see that in the picture, and he grabbed me by the shoulders, and he spun me around, and he screamed at me, get the hell out of my race and give me those numbers. And when he had me by the shoulder, he tried to rip my numbers off like this. I was terrified. I really was. Because it came out of the blue like that. And I tried to get away, and it was like that monster dream you have at night before the race. You're trying to get away from the monster, and he had me by the shirt and was screaming at me, get out of the race. And little Arnie, my coach, was screaming, leave her alone, Jock, she's all right. I've trained her. And I thought, he knows him. What's happening? And my boyfriend, Tom Miller, who was in the race only because I was in the race and he was going to show that he could run too.
Without training, of
Without
course,
training,
right?
of
Yeah,
course.
all
That's a
right.
whole other story. And he's a 235-pound ex-All-America football player turned into a hammer thrower. So he sees this happening, and he, without a word, he goes running full tilt and hits Jock with a crossbody block, takes him clean out of the race, flying through the air, and Jock landed on the side of the road. I mean, he really hit him. And I saw Jock flying and crunched over there. I said, oh my God, we've killed him, you know? And now I was scared all over again. And Arnie was scared too. And Arnie said, run like hell. And down the street we went. And we just went flying down the street, and every pandemonium, and the press truck was taking pictures. Well, you know, in hindsight, you say, how could Jock have been so silly to do this in front of the press truck? Well, he lost his temper. It just happened. And it's a series of coincidences you couldn't have repeated if you were Cecil B. DeMille. I mean, it was just all happened in a row. The press truck hung with us for quite a while because they didn't believe I was serious. And when they realized I was serious and in it for the duration, then they went on up to the start of the race. And a lot of those journalists waited in the cold and the rain and the snow for me for 4 hours and 20 minutes, because that's how long it took me to finish the race, because they were determined to write the story about the girl who couldn't do it. An interesting thing happens when you're running, and I think you know this, Diane, is that you can't run 26 miles, 385 yards and stay mad. And I was very, very angry after this happened. I went from being frightened and embarrassed to being very angry, and then I calmed down, and Arnie said, come on, let's just get it together. And you become resolved. You work out your aggressions and your anxieties. And I said, why am I because I thought I was the only woman in this race. Why aren't there other women here? And why aren't there sports scholarships and professional teams and opportunities for women? And the light bulb went on. You know, it wasn't because women weren't interested. It was because they didn't have the opportunity. And I was there because I was lucky. I had parents that encouraged me, and that I'd met Arnie, who encouraged me and gave me the opportunity to prove myself. And I was determined when I finished the race, I was going to do two things. I was going to become a better athlete, because I knew I was better than a 4-hour and 20-minute marathoner. And I wanted then to create opportunities for other women in running, in sports, but I decided in running because it was cheap and easy and convenient for them, and create avenues of acceptance. And I was very, very blessed, being 20 years old, to have such a negative thing happen to me, that I could turn into a positive thing, and actually something that gave me the rest of my life. And
Not just for you, but for so many other women.
Yeah, but it gave me like my career and my goal and my religion and my husband and all kinds of wonderful things. It was just amazing. And to help positively change the lives of many women and lead them down a road of fitness and opportunity has been extremely validating and gratifying for me.
Did you run again in 1968?
No, I was afraid to run. I was afraid that Jock Semple would come after me again, because he was very angry. And I was also persuaded by my boyfriend, who had then become my husband, Big Tom Miller, to please not to run, because it would ruin his chances of making the Olympic team in the hammer throw, and because he thought that I would create incidents. So
Another hurrah.
Hurrah. So I sat on my hands for 68 and 69. But by 70, I realized Tom wasn't going to make the Olympic team, that in fact our marriage probably wasn't going to make the long haul, that I missed running and I missed the marathon desperately, and I wanted to come back and I wanted to break 4 hours, and I came back and I did a 3:35.
Wonderful.
So it was a wonderful, wonderful time for me. And from then on, I got better and realized that wonderful dream that an athlete realizes, which is to watch your body get better. It was a great feeling.
Tell us about your Boston Marathon in 1972.
In 1972 was a tremendous year, because that was the first year women were accepted officially. And it was a funny year for me. I really thought I was going to win that year. And unfortunately, what I did is I wore a very, very nice outfit that was sort of programmed for colder weather. It was all like a bodysuit and tights and a wrap. And it turned out to be a hot day. And 4 or 5 miles into the race, I realized I was in very serious trouble and had to stop in a gas station, find a pair of knife or scissors or whatever it was, and cut off those tights and take off this long sleeve top, and lost, probably 6 or 7 minutes, lost the race. But still finished third. And the funny thing about this is that I was presented a trophy. And
By who?
By Jock Semple. And he was sputtering and fuming, and I was kind of picking my fingernails. And the trophy was broken. it had broken in packing or something, and he was very embarrassed, and he handed me a trophy, and he said, I'm sorry, this is a broken trophy. And he said, I've been mad at you for 5 years, and you deserve a broken trophy. And that trophy resides, still broken, in the Hall of Fame in Utica, New York, long-distance running Hall of Fame.
Now, Jock and you ultimately had further exchanges. There was a point where he kissed you on air.
I was very nervous, and I was on the starting line because we had deserved one starting line position, and I wound up getting it that year. And I was standing there, I was very nervous, and all of a sudden, Jock came over and grabbed me, and I went, because I thought, oh my gosh, what have I done wrong? And he pulled over and gave me a big kiss, and he said, come on, Lass, let's get a bit of notoriety. And this picture, flashbulbs popping, you know, and that was the picture the New York Times used the next day, and it was subtitled. The caption said, "The End of an Era."
What were the limits, Catherine, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s to women's running?
One of the biggest problems with women's sports in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and of course before that, was this prevailing myth that somehow a woman would lose her femininity. And it was kind of whispered what that would be. I mean, would it be big hairy legs and mustaches, or would your uterus fall out and we'd never be able to have children, or you'd never get a boyfriend or a husband or whatever? Well, of course, you know, you hear these myths all your life. You're not going to become an athlete. You're not even going to go there. And for me and many women who were in sports, we loved the sense of accomplishment and the fitness and the joy and the real good health that came with it. And so overcoming these myths was very, very hard. What we did is many of us began campaigning to try to overcome the rules with hard evidence. One of the things I'm most proud of myself for doing is creating the opportunities for women. And because I felt that if you see thousands of women out running and they're doing it really well, obviously, you know, actions speak louder than words, and this is going to stand for a lot of testimony. But the other thing we did is we really worked hard on getting the medical evidence together. And there were many physicians who were particularly stand out in this area, and I would think of Dr. David Martin, for instance, or Dr. Ernst von Achen and David Kostil. These are people who did research on women and found, in fact, that when it came to endurance events, women had inherent capability that perhaps men didn't even have. They could go longer, but not as fast. They could stay the distance. They had more stamina and endurance, and there are a lot of reasons for that. Perhaps, you know, it's the higher fat content in our systems. Anyway, but that evidence had to be presented to the governing bodies, the International Amateur Athletic Association, Federation, and the IOC, and particularly the International Olympic Committee. But when it was submitted, we finally won them over. But it took a long, long time.
You were banned, as I recall, by the AAU. Was that for running without a chaperone?
One of the amazing things is after the 1967 Boston Marathon, and this just shows you how mad Jock Semple was at me, is he obviously filed a petition that night to have me disqualified from the Amateur Athletic Union. Well, now the irony of this is I'd gone through all paperwork and getting the numbers so that I wouldn't get in trouble with the AAU. But anyway, I got a special delivery letter the next day at my university, which suspended me from the Amateur Athletic Union for running the Boston Marathon for one, fraudulent entry because I signed my name with my initials. 139 guys had signed with their initials. 2, for running with men, which was really hateful because who else was there to run with? And also that was sort of a sexual implication. You know, running with men was somehow bad. The third thing was running in a race of longer than 1.5 miles, because the longest distance, they said, for women was 1.5 miles of cross country. And I said, well, what problem is that? And it was whispered that I might injure myself. So this rule was designed to protect me from myself. But the last rule was the best. The last reason was the best, as I was suspended from the AAU for running the Boston Marathon without a chaperone. So that shows you how far we've come.
Catherine, any final comments?
I would like to tell every woman and man who's listening that you're limited only by your dreams, and that it is as simple as putting one foot in front of the other to reach out and grab health, fitness, and a tremendous sense of accomplishment and self-esteem. And I would really love everyone out there to get moving.
Before you know it, she talks. Before you know it, she walks. Before you know it, she knows you. Before you know it, she has a heart. Before you know you're pregnant, when your baby's no bigger than a grain of rice, before she's a twinkle in your eye, that's when you need to take folic acid every day. After that, it's too late to prevent some serious birth defects. Folic acid now, before you know it.
What inspired David to spend a lifetime exploring distant planets?
Star Trek.
What inspired Nicole to bring new life into the world?
The first time I saw St. Elsewhere.
And what inspired Stephen to risk his life for others?
Hill Street Blues.
Television. Who will it inspire next?
Hey Brianna, what was that math assignment?
Hello?
Hi, honey. What are you doing?
Doing homework with my friends. Aren't I supposed to?
Just called to say hi, that's all.
Hi? That's all?
Yep.
Dad, that's so cool.
But hey, coolness runs in our family.
Well, I was thinking that I need my allowance a little early.
What a coincidence. I need someone to clean the garage for me.
Really?
Family.
I'll see you tonight, Dad.
Isn't it about time?
I love you.
I love you too, Dad.
From the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I would like to read to you a quote from Jean Driscoll's book, Determined to Win. The leader's yellow jacket bobbed in front of me as we cruised at over 30 miles per hour down the hill past the 15-mile mark. Determined not to let her get away from me, I punched the wheels with all my might, trying to squeeze out every last bit of speed that I could. The road was rough, and as I sped along, wham, my racing wheelchair hit a hidden pothole, sending it and me flying into the air. I held my breath as I sailed forward and slammed down hard on all three wheels. I tapped my brakes in order to regain control. It all happened in a split second, but that was all the opportunity my opponent needed. I looked up and she had pulled away from me. Jean Driscoll went on to win that race despite the near crash. Like most of the things she's achieved in life, the race was hard won. Born with spina bifida, Driscoll was never expected to walk. Yet through her intense determination and her hard work, she learned to fly across the finish line in a wheelchair. In the year 2000, she became the only person ever to win the Boston Marathon 8 times. Joining me now is Jean Driscoll, 8-time winner of the Boston Marathon and one of the top athletes of our time. Jean, what made you start racing marathons?
Racing marathons was not my idea. I had to be talked into it. In fact, it took my racing coach 2 years to talk me into even trying a marathon. And so I promised him I would do one marathon only. It was the Chicago Marathon in October of '89. And I had a real fear of the marathon distance. I thought it was too far. I wasn't strong enough. I was afraid of getting lost. I was afraid of getting chased down by loose dogs. I was afraid of not going across the finish line, just dying in the middle somewhere. But I ended up having a pretty good race in Chicago. I keyed off one of my teammates, stayed with her till mile 20, so really only had to do the last 10K on my own. When I came across the finish line, my coach, who grew up in Hanover, by the way, said, "Jean, do you realize what you just did?" And I said, "I came across the finish line, I didn't get lost." And he said, "Yeah, and you qualified to do the Boston Marathon." And all the excitement just drained out of me. I said, "I don't want to do the Boston Marathon. I don't want to do any more marathons." I didn't enjoy the marathon training and all the time that it took. And I just didn't want to do the distance. But my coach said, "Jean, people dream about qualifying for Boston. You can't qualify
And he's right.
and not do it." So we all know that when coaches strongly suggest something, somehow you end up going along with it.
You cave in. Thank God you did. Describe what it was like racing in Boston.
Well, I came into Boston about 2 weeks after the women's wheelchair basketball team on which I was playing at the University of Illinois. We had won the national championship. So I was on cloud nine. I was so excited that we had won this national championship. And of course it's in April, which is at the end of the semester. So I'm thinking about the final exams before the final exams and final papers, and I did not want to come to Boston. I didn't want to do this marathon. I was only doing it because my coach wanted me to do it. And I, along with my teammates, went on a course drive-through the day before the marathon. And the first 10K, I was thinking, why do people talk about this race being so hard? It's all downhill. All I have to do is get in a tuck and I'm gone. Well, then I got to the second half and I saw all these hills and I started getting really intimidated. We went over Heartbreak Hill. It seemed like the hills in Newton just kept coming and coming and coming. In Champaign, Illinois, where I live and train, it's prairie land. Wow. The terrain is as flat as your desk without the paperwork. There are no hills with names.
What do you feel when you see the Citgo sign and there's only 1.2 miles to go? And I happen to know your strength is the hills.
Yes, yes, my strength is the hills. I have very good strength to weight ratio. My max bench press is 210 pounds. I did that when I was 110 pounds. So the hills, the very thing that I thought was going to be the biggest problem for me, actually was one of my biggest strengths because of my strength to weight ratio. When I am racing, in my racing chair, I am bent over so that I can get the most efficient, powerful push on my push rim. So I don't see a lot of things that are up here. I'm seeing the road. I know that there's a mile left to go because it's painted on the road, and also because I have a little cyclocomputer that tells me my mileage, average speed, max speed, distance, time. So I have a running clock, and I know pretty much where I am in the race. But for me, the excitement comes when I see that painted 1 mile to go. Now, if I've gotten away from my competition in the hills, that's a mark of excitement. If I haven't gotten away from my competition, then I'm pretty nervous because my main competitor, my main rival, was Louise Sauvage, and she is very good on flat terrain, and one of her incredible strengths is sprints, final sprints. So if Louise and I were neck and neck when we crossed that 1 mile to go, I knew my hands were going to be full. But if I'd gotten away in the hills, I still wasn't sitting easy, but I knew that I only had to stave off the competition for 1 more mile.
Jean, you won the Boston Marathon in years 1990 through 1996. Describe the years that you did not win, and then tell us about year 2000.
Well, I think the years that I didn't win Boston were the years that my fan base was built. Because when I was coming out here to Boston and winning year after year after year, people really didn't think that there was any other competition and that I was just coming in because I could and I was just winning. It didn't matter that I was breaking the world record. People just didn't think that there was other competition out there. But then in 1997, things started to happen differently for me. I was coming into Cleveland Circle at mile 22, coming down the hill at 20 miles an hour, setting up for a left-hand turn. My left wheel slipped into the trolley track, and I was thinking, oh great, now I'm going to have to pop my wheel out of this track, and Louise is going to take off and sprint, and I'm going to have to chase her down. And prior to that, I had been planning, okay, I'm going to be the first one into the turn, out of the turn. I'm going to surge to the bridge, and I'm going to gap her on that bridge. And while I'm doing all this calculating, my wheel slips into the trolley track, and before I knew it, I'd done the 180, and I was down on the ground. And I thought, this is the first year I'm not going to win this race. But then I just got right back into race mode and got back up on all three wheels. I'd flatted a tire. I wasn't able to do anything with it. And after being stopped for several minutes, I pushed the police and all the volunteers away, and I said, I gotta go, I gotta go. Then I was like, I gotta hang on to second place. And I could just feel the third place woman coming. And I was so happy that I got going when I did, because I ended up hanging on to second place, but third place was only 25 seconds behind me. And I kept looking over my shoulder, and this gal, Candace Cable, is getting closer and closer and closer and closer. Candace Cable is a well-known name here in Boston. Yes, she won the women's wheelchair division 6 times. So I was pretty excited that I hung on to second place. Then in 1998, I thought, well, you know, last year put wheelchair racing on the map as far as people realizing this is a legitimate sport. We crash, we have incidents, it's sport. But this year, 898, 999, perfect. So I'm coming down Boylston, getting closer to the finish line. I had gotten away from Louise on Heartbreak Hill, but I knew that she was closing. I'm, maybe 100 meters away from the finish line, and I hear the finish line announcer announce, Jean Driscoll, 8-time winner of the Boston Marathon. And I thought, wow, I must have a significant enough of a gap on Louise that they're calling me as the winner. So I started to let up in my sprint a little bit, took the last couple strokes, was getting ready to raise my arms to cut the tape, and Louise came by me and cut it 0.2 of a second before me. It was the hardest loss I had experienced in all my 14 years of racing before I retired. That loss in '98 was the hardest because I wasn't expecting it, and I was numb. And as I crossed the finish line, I put my hands on the front end of my chair, and I'm like, what just happened? What just happened? Oh my gosh, what just happened? It was like a bird flying into a window, being stunned like that. And then all of a sudden, I had the microphones and the cameras in my face asking me that question, Jean, what just happened? Last year was the crash, but what just happened? And I didn't know. I didn't know. But I think one of the poignant things about that year for me was, and it took several days for me to realize this and appreciate this, but I had a platform of winning, and people knew that Jean Driscoll knew how to win. But what really moves my heart is that I was also entrusted to a platform of losing. And I think that the lessons that people learn on that platform of losing are far greater. And I know that more people were watching me closely that year than when I won in '94 and '95 and '96 and all those other years. So even though it was a difficult loss, it just filled my heart up to know, wow, I got to be an example one more time on an incredible platform. And what really was amazing to me was watching the TV reports that night and reading the newspaper the next day and people talking about how gracious I was. I was not feeling gracious. I was not feeling gracious. But people saw something inside of me, and that really felt good, that whatever it was that was deep inside me, I have a strong Christian faith, and I believe that that's what was taking care of me at that time. But people saw that even though it was a difficult time, that there was still character, and I think it's so important for kids to be able to see that.
Yes, it is.
So then in 1999, I was neck and neck with Louise Sauvage again. I came out of her draft. I started sprinting to pass her, and I ran out of race. Little by little, I was coming up, and boom, the race ended, and she beat me by half a second. I thought, this is almost a replay of last year, only last year was a complete shock. But this year, oh my gosh, when I came back in 2000, people had already started writing me off, and they thought, Jean's past her prime. She had all those years of winning, but now we've got new, younger blood coming in, and this is Louise's race. And it had been a long time since I had been looked upon as an underdog. So even though there was pressure to win, it kind of felt good that people were looking at me as the underdog, and people were discounting me, because that gave me enough energy, and it stoked those embers enough that I thought, this is the perfect stage now to come back, and that prove you wrong spirit that I grew up with went into action. And it was so glorious to come across that finish line in 2000 as the first and only 8-time winner of the Boston Marathon, but also to have so many more people watching the wheelchair division, understanding the sport, appreciating the athleticism. That was all a part of that euphoric, victorious feeling.
Jean, will you ever compete in Boston again?
no, I probably won't be competing anymore. The fire inside started to dwindle the last couple of years of my career, and as I said earlier, for 14 years I trained 6 to 7 days a week, 2 to 4 hours a day. It was a very focused, committed lifestyle, and if you want to win races, you can't miss workouts. And I have interests in other areas of my life now, and I want a little more spontaneity. I want a little more freedom in my schedule, and so those are the main reasons why I decided to retire. And you know, there's a part of me that wishes I still had that oomph, that motivation to train from November to April so that I can keep coming back to Boston, but there's another side of me that just gave everything I had inside of me during that time frame. And I just want to leave well enough alone. I went out on top here. My very last race of my career was in Sydney. It was a marathon. I won by 0.4 of a second over a Japanese gal. I mean, I got to go out on top. A lot of athletes don't even get to choose when their careers end. I got to choose when I wanted to end my career, and I got to go out on top. I'm not going to mess with that.
What does the future hold for Jean Driscoll?
Well, currently I've been traveling around the country and actually around the world doing speaking and also teaching some wheelchair track and road racing camps. I don't have an interest in coaching because coaching is just a committed lifestyle as racing and being the athlete. So I don't want to be tied to two-a-days anymore. But I have a real heart for kids. I love kids. We click, we get along. So I enjoy working with them. One of my lifelong missions has been to educate people about disability, what it is and what it isn't, change perspectives, change the way people think about themselves. I love challenging people, whether they have disabilities or not, it doesn't matter to me. I love challenging people to dream big and to work hard. I think a lot of times today, people don't dream big because they're afraid to. And the reason they're afraid to is because they're afraid of failure. We have all been taught to learn, or we've all been taught to think of failure as the opposite of success. Well, I don't believe failure is the opposite of success. It's a part of success. It's a function of success. And you can't talk to any person who's experienced success in their lives without having experienced the failure. Failure is what makes us stronger. And oftentimes when I'm speaking, I give the analogy of weightlifting. When somebody goes in and does a weightlifting workout and works as hard as they can, the next day, typically, they're sore. And the reason they're sore is because they have all these little micro tears in their muscle fibers. They've broken down the muscle, they've stretched it to its limit, and now it needs to heal. But when it heals, it comes back stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's what failure does for us. It breaks us down, it stretches us to the limit and breaks us down. And for a time, it's painful. But as we heal from whatever that experience was, we are wiser and we are stronger and we come back in better shape than we were before. And I love encouraging people with that analogy because, again, I believe people are afraid of dreaming big. They're afraid of seeing their names in marquee lights. And it's a crime, especially for kids, because they're too young to begin limiting themselves.
You know, I was there when Dr. King shared his dream with the world.
I have a dream today.
And I was there when we launched men to the moon.
Lift off.
I was even there when Mark McGwire broke the home run record. Yep, I've seen a lot in my day. Thanks to television, of course.
Dad, where are you going?
I'm gonna go play a little golf.
Why?
Because it's Saturday, and that's the day that Dad plays golf.
Why?
Because I really like golf.
But why?
Well, good question. Because most of the time I just spend the day chasing a little white ball around the course.
Why?
Well, usually it's because I hit the ball into the rough or out of bounds.
Why?
I don't know. Sometimes I wonder why I even took up this game. Maybe I'll cut back a little.
Why?
Well, for starters, maybe I could spend a few more Saturdays doing something with you.
Hey, Dad.
Huh?
When?
Family. Isn't it about time? From the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.